Thank you.
I think you're muted.
Can you hear and see everything all right?
Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Danielle Hinton. I'm an educational developer within the Higher Education Futures Institute at the University of Birmingham. And I came to that role with about sort of 18 years worth of background in distance learning, e-learning and instructional design. So I'm quite passionate about this old but yet juicy and most relevant topic for us today. So I just thought I'd start looking at the benefits of discussion boards before we get down to the nuts and bolts of actually creating a very robust activity. And they're all listed here, but I just think the days of COVID and asynchronous activities, I think they've really come back to the fore and can be really, really empowering from an inclusivity and diversity point of view for international students, for widening participation. So there's lots of really useful affordances, but only if we can create some really robust and purposeful activities. And that's where actually some of the stuff that we do before we obviously create an activity can be really, really important. And I think a lot of us will always be advocating the whole setting expectations, and they come in really even more critical with these kind of activities. And obviously there's netiquette, not to forget defining what roles we as educationals will be playing in the activity, and also what the roles we're defining for our students as well, because I don't think we can really go in there in the same way we go into face-to-face interactions. I think because of people's experiences, we really need to set the scene. And the one thing I'm just point out at the minute, because it's really coming to be useful, at Birmingham we use Canvas, and we had lots of debates when we pivoted to remote learning about attendance, including on our PG Cert. And actually I utilised a lot of discussion board activities over 1 to 2 to 3 weeks and actually made them graded, not because I was grading them. Don't get me wrong on the whole. I was not assigning any kind of grade. It was just so that it went into the grade book. I could see that people had attended. One thing that I didn't do that I'm very conscious now on is to actually talk through response time lag. And that's a really important one, especially if you're going over 1 or 2 week period. People that post at the beginning can get really, tense. I've posted, where is everybody else? And you can see there's actual patterns of engagement depending on how excited and motivated your learners are. I thought I'd just put in the key thing about numbers in groups. There is literature behind this, but I came across the literature probably 15 years ago, so I can't possibly tell you where I got it from, but it has borne out in practice. If you're doing inquiry specific activities, numbers, it's important to have a small number, and more discussion, it's better to have actually a larger number than you'd actually want in the face-to-face environment, which is interesting. So in terms of challenges, I think this speaks to our need of being super purposeful and super targeted, because our learners, especially if we're doing distance learning, remote learning, pivoting between face-to-face and remote, our learners are not next to us as they are in the face-to-face environment. So there isn't that opportunity to ask. So we need to really be purposeful about what we're doing and sort of checking that our colleague could understand what we've asked of students, and then obviously our students. I think the last point on this particular slide just speaks to the thing that you can do and create the best possible activity. It doesn't necessarily mean that our learners or part of our learning portfolio will actually pay any of attention to our instructions. So it's great to give example posts of how, you should put together a post. I've tried it a couple of times. I've been on the receiving end of it as a learner. It's a great idea, but actually most learners will ignore that. So I don't often actually provide that as an instruction just because it doesn't tend to work. So this is my discussion board anatomy. So always having anchor, introduction, trigger questions, and then being very clear about the activity instructions. And I'll go through that now. So in some shape or form, and this is the this is very, very obvious, definitely have some sort of really engaging introduction, anchor, rationale, try and draw the students in. Why are they going to take part in this activity? And obviously nowadays we've got access to all sorts of really great resources, and I've used to great effect, and I'll show you in a moment, the use of audio and video as stuff to get our learners going, and that sort of links then in nicely into the next thing of, apart from the introduction, it's very important to have really well thought out trigger questions to really engage the students. Now, here is a long list that I've culled from various actual live discussions in various modules around the university. Some of that may do something for you. Obviously, it's about picking and mixing what is important for your learning outcomes. Personally, I would go with more than one, but actually, as you'll see in a moment, there's lots of different ideas, and it's picking through and seeing what will actually work for your subject, for your students, for the length of time that you've got, and sort of the environment. So here's an example of a activity actually which I pinched in the best noble way of educational sharing. I was working with a colleague. They'd come up with this really nifty idea for an activity, and I then operationalized it in our PG Cert for early career staff. And the actual activity was teaching for me is like, and then they had to actually put down, share an image, object of an image, audio, video, all that sort of thing, to really unpick what the topic meant to them, and then look at what changes they wanted to see in themselves by the end of the program. The next one, this comes off a another activity out of our PG Cert, and it was focusing on inclusivity. And actually, this was part of the online pivot remote teaching, emergency teaching period of time, and I had to teach a session on inclusivity and diversity, and thought, well, how I'm going to do this that's going to make it engaging for the participants. So actually I chose 2 videos and 1 audio clip, and actually framed the activity around those with these trigger questions to really get the participants thinking, reflecting, and then sharing their thoughts. And actually, my personal observation is this activity worked 100 times better in the online environment than I felt a similar activity worked in the face-to-face. And I think it comes back to the affordances of being able to think and reflect. Whereas if you're teaching in a 3-hour block, which we do, there's not much time to actually really consider and reflect and actually take the views of everybody in a class. So I did some more searching last night as I was preparing this and found some additional information. So this comes from the University of Central Florida. This may do something for you. So I thought I'd collate all of these different ways, because it's about being inspired and get the juices flowing, which can be really hard at times, especially if you're locked down in your own house and you don't necessarily have that opportunity to talk through designs. And I think this one makes a very, very good point about being relevant, being current, and definitely adding a bit of controversy if you can. Because I've been on the receiving end as a learner in the last couple of years of some really badly designed discussions that, I'd been waiting to take these modules on NGOs, and but the discussions were just, it was just read this. It was just very demotivating. So, authenticity is definitely important. Obviously, you don't necessarily have to stick to just a discussion. You've got obviously a lot of different things you can do that can work swimmingly in the online environment just as much, probably better than face-to-face. So you've got role play scenarios. The review for peer feedback is really, really useful. And I think that KWL, I'm going to really think about that, because I think that's got some interesting things that we can go there. What do you know? What do you want to know? And what have you learned? So all of these things are dependent on, obviously, subject, your learners, the learner's level, those kind of things. I think this is the last one. This is from the University of Chicago, and that's some nice prompts, what-if prompts. I think I'm going to think through and see if I can actually operationalize this for some of our going forward discussions, because I think there's definitely potential. And obviously the persona role play, if you want to get people into the mindset of, let's say, a particular composer, a particular engineer, a particular big person in your discipline, that can actually be very useful, and perhaps at an undergraduate level. I must say that most of my experience is obviously with postgraduates. So moving quickly along, you can have a look at that on the slides, which will be available. So just help to stimulate some stuff or get your mental juices going on question types. So on the last legs here, it's really important to let people know what they need to be producing, and also the size of the production. Most of our production, generally speaking, is text-based. Obviously, it doesn't have to be, but I tend to go, and it's probably historically, ask students to produce a postcard-sized response. Obviously, some people will be brief, some people will be longer, but it gives them an idea that we're not wanting an essay for a response. You can obviously utilize roles. If you're going to do that, give people clear responsibilities and let your learners, have it be perhaps the chairperson one time, summarizer the next time. So giving them the options, and that can work very well. So instructions, particulars. So we definitely, I'm a big advocate of telling my students that I need at least one original reply and then either 1 or 2 responses to peers to help get community going. Your VLE may be like Canvas, that allows you to put you must post before you see peers posts, and that's a useful feature that you can invoke at different times. Okay, so time and engagement. I'm a big advocate, and I'm talking from my background in postgraduate distance learning, of giving students 2 weeks to complete a discussion. But obviously, if we're doing more with undergraduates and more in this sort of COVID environment, then there may be more focused week kind of activities. But definitely give students an idea of how long they should spend time on task. Obviously encourage them when they need to do stuff by, and how often they should interact. And that includes giving an indication of how often you will be and what you'll be interacting with. So last but not least, it's really important to give our learners an indication of how and when they can expect a conclusion of the whole matter. Obviously, if you are time poor and student rich in numbers, then this could also be a great opportunity to allocate one or a small group of students to do a summing up post. So that's really the nub of it all. I've just got a few examples, and this gives you an idea of the whole activity for this one on being an inclusive educator. And there's a few other examples and a bit of reading at the end of the PowerPoint, which I will share somehow in Teams, and you can have a look through. So you can see this one, this is taken and decontextualized for your reading pleasure. And this was actually utilizing news, social media, sort of issues, writing a post. It gives you an idea how that's been set out. And that's that. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I ask, does anybody have any questions? If so, can you just throw your hands up? If you don't know how to do it, if you look at the central grey bar on Teams, there's a little picture of a hand. Click that and your hand will go up. Kathy. You might be on mute.
You're muted, Kathy.
£50 fine. Okay, no, I was just saying how much I appreciated that, Danielle, so thank you ever so much. Okay, and I was just saying you've really confirmed my experience of using kind of discussion boards, and we did a debate and we used loads of Kay Samble and Sally Brown's material, and I had 2 finger puppets and I'm going your team for, your team against, and we summed it up with having like a vote for who'd made the best arguments irrespective of what your views were, and that really has gone down very, very well with people. But I wondered if you had any tips about the clunkiness of discussion boards, because that is a real barrier I found. And I don't know whether it's just we use Brightspace, and I don't know whether it's particular to that, but they often come back and say, why can't we do it on, I don't know, Snapchat or Telegram or, you know, WhatsApp or something, because it's much more intuitive. So I just wondered if you've got any comments.
I think that speaks back to us setting expectations, and I haven't really had anything like that, mostly teaching postgraduate level participants, so I can understand that more undergraduates would be you know, wanting to do something that's a bit more now. And yes, discussion boards are a little clunky and a bit dated, but I think it's about you talking through the affordances and in what you're going to get learning and teaching wise. And I think there is a lot of benefit for it being a safe space internally, as we discussed in the first presentation.
Great, thank you.
So we've got a few more hands up. Liz.
Hi, is that me, as in Elizabeth Hinton?
That's the one.
Great, sorry. I really enjoyed your work because don't often get the opportunity to have somebody who's dealing with the same sorts of issues as I am, and that's been really fascinating. But some of my modules across a year tend to be in the hundreds. I could have 300 or 400 students, and managing the discussion boards is absolute nightmare. Just wondering if you've seen any literature on managing that sort of level of number of students, really. Thank you.
I mean, there's definitely literature out there, because obviously discussion boards have been in regular active use for over sort of 20 years. What I have done with large numbers is obviously you can set up groups. I know you can do that in Canvas and many other VLEs. And depending obviously the level of your students, I would be inclined, if you don't have postgraduate teaching assistants or lots of willing colleagues, to actually build in roles and responsibilities into that particular activity. So you might have somebody that's, you know, a problem checker that will then alert you if there's issues going on. That's not as great.
Okay, I'll think through some of the admin things. Thank you, that's been really useful. It's also nice to see somebody who's using Canvas. I'm relatively new to Canvas, just kind of really getting to grips with it. I had seen the graded thing, no real idea what that was, but I'm now going to go and explore that. So thank you, you've changed my practice for today.
Yeah, under settings in Canvas, there's lots of different things you can check, and obviously graded is one of those.
Cheers, thank you.
Brilliant. Kimberly.
Hi Danielle, great talk. With a larger cohort, as the last speaker also said, what are your feelings around anonymous posting? So not using it for grading, but actually encouraging students to ask questions. I find that a lot of them, especially in Canvas, because you can't set up anonymous posting, don't participate. They see a discussion board and they instead just automatically email the lecturer. Have you got any tips, tricks, ideas around that?
So from my point of view, yeah, Canvas doesn't allow anonymous, which is slightly irritating. But on the other hand, my opinion and my experience is if you want to create a discussion board, you need to do it for a very particular reason. And if it's about the learning and nature of your module, it really needs to be linked somehow to assessment. I don't personally think there's much value in just putting a board up there, unless you're getting students of a particular type that are really a little bit too much excited about your topic, and they'll generate their own discussion, which is obviously not most people's cases. If you do need anonymous and you're happy to provide that, I would probably be inclined to insert a Padlet into a page in Canvas and allow people to post anonymously there. But I'd be really thinking through the implications of anonymity. Thanks for that. Thanks.
Brilliant. I think we've got one chance for one last question from Siobhan.
Yes, anecdotally, I just wanted to ask yourself, Danielle, and also the group about your experience of using Teams as a discussion board. From how I've seen it used with staff and also within the curriculum, it can be extremely dynamic in the kind of chaos way that was mentioned earlier on. So there's less scope for structure, it's easier to lose the thread of it, and it can go in all kinds of directions. Which is obviously good and bad. Have you had a chance to explore using Teams for that? A bit like we're using now, but within a wider scope, because the way the platform works seems to change some of the dynamics in ways that are both good and bad, but definitely encourages more engagement, it seems, although it's more difficult to measure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that whatever platform we use, we as educators feel confident and comfortable and can share that with our learners and actually think through the implications of how the platform operationalizes discussion and possibly build that into the activity. I haven't personally, Birmingham has just, I think it's been available for 2 or 3 weeks as a whole institutional deployment. So it's still in the irritating me phase of getting to grips with the technology. So I think anything can work. I'm personally fond of threaded discussions, but you know, if the technology is there and it will work for you, then by all means, let's all give it a go.